In this position, playing white against Wely Topalov, Vichy Anand played knight f6. The threat is rook e8 checkmate. Obviously, black tried to defend himself with rook d8, but after a brilliant sacrifice queen c1, Topalov resigned. The point is that this queen is heading to c7. After the only reasonable move from black, rook takes rook, there comes queen c7 as promised, and after king f8 there is a very elegant checkmate, queen takes d6. In my previous video on Indian tactics, I only mentioned Vishwanathan Anand as a father of the Indian chess school. However, I didn't show any examples of his play. This time, I will make up for this. Vichy Anand, the world champion from 2007 through 2013, is one of the best tactical players in chess history. From his very youth, he was prized for his ability to calculate variations with lightning speed. For the start, I'll show you two relatively simple examples where Anand finished off his opponents through brutal assaults on their kings. Then we'll move on to two additional examples showing his ability to navigate through tactical complexities in highly unusual, weird positions. Finally, I leave you with an exercise based upon one of Anand's games, and you will have opportunity to follow in the world champion's footsteps. In short, please be invited to a nice journey. The first example comes from Anand's early game against Chinese Grandmaster Ye Jiangchuan. In this position, the Indian landed a decisive punch, bishop takes f7 check. This bishop must be captured, and it can be captured either with a king or with a rook. If black takes with the king, there comes check, and the only move is here, and after rook g7 check, mate comes in the next move. Therefore, in this position, black took with the rook, and now we may look into the combination main line. Actually, it has a finish that is not much different from what we have just seen. White checks, king must be covered, and if he is covered with the rook, there comes another check, king must go here, check again, and after the final desperate cover, there is a checkmate. The Chinese player didn't like that kind of finish, therefore, in this moment, he decided to cover his king with the queen. However, after takes, he resigned after two more moves because white's material advantage is more than enough to win the game. In this example, Anand's victim was my compatriot, Polish Grandmaster Robert Kempiński, a very nice guy who is always ready to throw at you a whole load of jokes. Unfortunately to him, Anand was not a joke, and he started his assault with a little but extremely powerful move, bishop g6. You may call it a discovered sacrifice, as the black rook can take the white queen. Unfortunately for black, the outcome is an immediate disaster, because after this check there is a checkmate in the next move. By the way, as you will see in the next part of this video, that kind of trick, a discovered sacrifice, is something that Anand really likes. At the same time, it's a discovered attack because white threatens to capture this rook with checkmate, and black has to react to this threat somehow. Obviously, both players understood that it's not enough just to connect the rooks, because after this simple move, we have a backrank mate once again. Therefore, if black wants to be stubborn in this position, he has two reasonable options. The first one is to move the attacked rook, and it was played by Kempiński. Another one was to cover this rook with a queen. Actually, both are losing, but let's look first into this queen f6 defense, and you will see some exceptionally beautiful lines that were left behind the scenes. Now the winning move is queen e2 attacking along the f-file, and if black doesn't want to give up material immediately, he must go back with his queen to protect the rook. White continues with queen h5, threatening with checkmate, and after the forced h6 move, white's task is to deflect the black queen so that she doesn't protect the rook and the f8 square anymore. And the correct move is a brilliant attack with the queen. Obviously, if black takes the white queen, checkmate comes immediately. On the other hand, in this position, black cannot hide his queen against white attacks. At first sight, it may appear that a tricky defense is queen d6, hoping for takes and checkmate. But obviously, white doesn't have to play like this. Instead of taking the queen, he may take the rook, then pin the queen, and the win is easy. Therefore, black might start with exchanging rooks and only then move the queen to d6. Unfortunately, it doesn't work as well. There comes another deflecting attack, and remember, whenever the black queen stops protecting the f8 square, there comes rook f8 checkmate. On the other hand, if the black queen goes away somewhere, white queen takes the rook. So the only move is e5, but the harassment continues. The only thing black can do is to take the bishop, white takes the rook and wins easy. So let's look once more into this critical position. Black could also play rook f6 to cover his queen, but it doesn't help as well. White just takes, and it is no use taking this rook with the queen because of rook d8 and checkmate in the next move. On the other hand, if black takes with a pawn, there is a checkmate as well. First we take this pawn with check, king must go, and now white should deflect the black queen from protecting the h7 square. So white plays rook d8 check, queen must take, and then check and mate. I believe Robert Kempiński calculated at least most of those lines, and that's why in this position, after the move bishop g6, instead of playing queen f6, he opted for rook g8. But he was lost anyway, as he was treated to a crushing bishop sacrifice, bishop takes h7. This bishop must be captured because it attacks the rook, and if the rook goes away, it is further attacked with additional deadly threats like queen f8 and checkmate in the next move, or queen h4 followed by queen h7. Therefore, the sacrifice was accepted. Anand played queen h4 check, and after king g6, he brought the rook into action. By the way, this rook is heading to g3, and those three heavy pieces are going either to checkmate the black king or to force black to give up the queen. Kempiński tried desperately to cover his king with a queen, but after this check, he resigned. The point is that the only reasonable move now is here, and after this check, black loses the rook. All those lines were very entertaining, but I would like you to remember how they started. And they started with this little move involving a discovered sacrifice. Remember this notion. In the next example, you will see a discovered sacrifice made in a much more spectacular fashion in a much more unusual position. This position comes from the game of Vichy Anand playing white against a French grandmaster, Joël Lautier. It is white's turn to make a move. At first sight, the position is highly difficult to assess because the chessboard is in a complete mess. Black is 2 pawns up, but on the other hand, white has a bishop pair. Both kings are rather exposed. This black bishop is kinda trapped, but on the other hand, white rook is pinned by the queen and attacked by the knight. So it seems that in near future, white will have to give up the exchange, namely this rook for this knight. In particular, it is no use capturing this bishop at once because after takes, takes and takes, black is an exchange up and winning. However, Vichy Anand went for this position sure-handedly as he prepared a move of astounding beauty and force, and the move is bishop g6 bang. And it is a funny coincidence, as you may remember in the previous example, we had also the key move bishop g6 with a discovered sacrifice of a queen. Now it is combined with a discovered attack against the queen, and the combination mainline is like this: queen takes, rook takes with check, king goes, checks, king goes, and checkmate. By the way, it changes nothing if at this moment black covers his king with a knight. Then we take the knight with check, king goes, checks, king goes, and checkmate. Obviously, in this position black has some other options, but Lautier quickly realized that the game cannot be saved. In particular, black is clearly losing when he takes the rook with a knight. There comes check, king must go, white exchanges queens and takes the knight with the bishop. In the outcome, white has several deadly threats. The most important is to take this pawn with checkmate. Actually, the best way to avoid this checkmate is to play rook g8, and now white can just take this rook and is already a piece up. Besides, the rook is hanging, the bishop is hanging, so black is dead, lost. In the face of such fatal prospects, Lautier played knight e7. First, he protected his queen, then he shielded his f7 pawn against the rook. On the other hand, black loses his major asset, namely the knight no longer attacks the rook on e3. Therefore, Anand can just capitalize on the activity of his pieces and the entrapment of the bishop on g2. First, he exchanged queens. Then he offered to exchange rooks as well. There are two purposes behind the last move. First of all, the black rook could be a protector against the skewer at the back rank. Furthermore, Anand wants to go away with this bishop on g6, and he wants to do it efficiently. And for example, if black takes, white takes back, and now there is a double threat. First, there is this skewer at the back rank, and then white wants to eat this entrapped bishop on g2. Therefore, in this moment, instead of exchanging rooks, Lautier played rook d8. It was a little bit more stubborn, but actually it didn't change much. Anand exchanged rooks anyway, and now the check on b8 would be inefficient because the knight could cover the king. However, Anand played bishop d3 and Lautier resigned. A very good and timely decision, like the one to give a like to this video. And the explanation is that this video is very informative, and going back to the game, if black doesn't want to lose the entrapped bishop at once, he must move it, and then white plays bishop b2. This bishop is attacking the rook, and besides it is heading to f6 to pin the knight. So the toughest defense is rook e8, but after bishop f6 anyway, black is completely tied down. When he runs out of pawn moves, he will lose the e7 knight inevitably, and besides, this entrapped bishop on h1 will be lost sooner or later as well. The game against Joël Lautier proved Anand is extremely strong when having messy positions like this, and he feels no fear just because his king is slightly exposed. You will see a similar situation in the next example. This position comes from the 2012 World Championship match between Vichy Anand and Boris Gelfand. By the way, it was the last World Championship match Anand won before losing the title to Magnus Carlsen. Anand is white, Gelfand is black, and it is black to move. It's clear that the black knight is attacked, so a normal move would be knight f6 or knight g7. In both cases, white could continue with h4 followed with king c2, bishop d3, this b1 rook could be transferred to g1, and generally white would attack on the king side, and Gelfand didn't like it. Therefore, instead of retreating the knight, Gelfand opted for queen f6. And now there is a seemingly strong threat to capture this pawn with check and attack on the rook. And most probably, Gelfand expected something like bishop e2, and now instead of moving this knight backward, he could place it on a beautiful square f4. Unfortunately for him, this tactics backfired, as instead of protecting the f3 pawn, Anand just took the knight. There followed check, king moved, queen ate the rook, and after queen f2, it turned out that the black queen is trapped in the corner and is just waiting for bishop d3 to be exchanged for this rook. It was enough for Boris Gelfand, who decided to resign precisely at this moment, just after the 17th move of Anand. Actually, he could get his queen out, but only at the cost of the knight. The most stubborn move was knight c6. And now it would be a mistake to play bishop d3, because after knight d4 check, the queen could have a safe square on f3. However, at this moment, white could just take the knight, and after queen takes the pawn, the best move is bishop d3, and white has a crushing attack, leading either to checkmate or to serious material gains. The point is, there are irreparable holes around black king, and white can attack this king with rook f1, threatening queen takes f7. Then, after knight d5, there are forks on f6, and on top of this, there is also an idea of h6 followed with queen f6 followed with queen g7 checkmate. If you want to see a video on tactical fireworks of younger generation of Indian players, please click the thumbnail on the final screen. And now we moved on to the final round of this video. It is an exercise for you. The position comes from the game of Vichy Anand playing black against Dutch Grandmaster Luc van Wely. It is black to move and win. If you have the solution, please leave a comment with words "I've done it." And let me make you a little hint. It is obvious that black is better, but if you let the white king get to e3 and stop the d-pawn, winning will not be that easy. But Vichy Anand finished off his opponent very quickly. So now you can pause the video and take a little time to think. Thank you for watching and bye.